Definers, welcome to Sustainability Defined for another Atypical episode. I'm Cecilia.
And I'm Nethra, and we are your hosts of Sustainability Defined. So our Atypical episodes are different from our usual formula, our typical explainers with the occasional expert interview. And today we're going to be talking about something that is seemingly atypical. Sustainability in aviation. I mean, I don't know why, Cecilia, but for some reason this feels like a controversial topic, even though it shouldn't be. There are advancements happening every day to make this essential travel method, less resource intensive. And it's most of our not so sustainable guilty pleasure to fly. I'm a big traveler myself, and we've all heard the controversy about Taylor Swift and her private jet footprint. So let's just jump into this atypical topic and this intersection of sustainability and aviation.
Let's do it. And Nethra, you bring up such a good point. I mean, that controversy about Taylor Swift was a really big one, and I think it still is. And I think we're very quick to demonize certain industries, I mean, myself included, but there are innovations happening in this industry that make me quite hopeful, and we learned that with what we're about to dive into. Nethra and I got the chance to attend the Airbus 2025 Summit in Toulouse, France. We had a lot of fun, and we finally got the chance to meet in person. So it was a lot of fun.
So exciting.
Yes. And during the summit, Airbus presented some of their super cool innovations and how they're trying to move their company and the overall industry towards decarbonization efforts. We learned some really cool things and are so excited to debrief with you, Definers, and let you all decide what you think for yourself about this industry.
Also, before we jump in, there's something we wanted to share with you all before we get into it. And that's that this is not sponsored content. Even though Cecilia and I attended the event, we want to be really intentional about our transparency because this podcast has worked with sponsors before, and we probably will in the future, but we'll be clear to share that when that's the case. And whether we work with a sponsor or not, we will always remain unbiased and focus on telling sustainability stories and defining topics at our core. So we're just sharing observation and insights from you from this summit so you can have a better understanding of these initiatives and form opinions for yourself. But back to it. After the debrief, you'll be hearing from a couple of people we interviewed in person with our mini mics that were really fun. Cecilia, I got them online.
So cute.
So cute.
So ASMR.
So ASMR. But we're going to be hearing from the Chief Sustainability Officer at Airbus, Julie Kitcher, and other experts that were working to make Airbus sustainability goals a reality. These folks include Sue Partridge, who is the head of the Wing for Tomorrow program, Jonathan Beck, who's an expert from the Fellow Fly program, and Anchi, I hope I'm saying that correctly, from the Direct Carbon Capture program, all from Airbus again. And these are sort of lightning interviews that we got to conduct in between like lunch and during the expos and keynotes.
It was quite hectic.
It was. We were like, can you come over here for a second? Trying to find like a quiet corner.
Lure them into the dark corner.
Exactly.
Some hard questions.
But, we were lucky enough to be able to talk to these folks. So, and they're some of aviation's leading experts.
Yeah, it was super exciting. And before we share those interviews and insights, if you aren't familiar with Airbus, they are an aviation manufacturer and can be thought of as a supplier in the supply chain for major airlines. Known competitors of Airbus include Boeing and Lockheed Martin. And in commercial aircraft, Airbus offers the most modern and fuel-efficient airplanes. Airbus is also a European leader in defense and security and one of the world's leading space businesses. They have been known to have a long-standing focus on innovating in sustainability and leading the charge for fuel efficiency and reduced emissions. Let's get into hearing from their leadership. So first, a question for the definers. Have you ever purchased an airplane ticket and you see the option to, quote, make it sustainable or decrease your carbon footprint, and they tell you even how much CO2 equivalent emissions you're saving? What does this mean? Are we actually decreasing our carbon footprint by choosing to pay for the more expensive option?
I've also wondered about this too, Cecilia, and also been kind of irritated sometimes when I see that. But we learned at the Airbus Summit that this is a way for companies to finance their green investments and invest in things like sustainable aviation fuels and other projects focused on offsetting the carbon emissions of your flight by investing in, different initiatives that reduce emissions elsewhere. We will get into what this means and what this is throughout the episode, so keep following along. And of course, offsetting is not a golden solution. It's one that I'm often hesitant of myself, but as the industry is trying to spread their focus to innovations, they are also looking to diversify those ways to reduce emissions internally as well.
Abatement and offsetting, such a dilemma in the sustainability space, and we'll get more into that later. So first, let's provide a little bit of background for our listeners concerning aviation and its associated carbon footprint. The aviation industry accounts for about 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The industry recognizes its environmental footprint and has set out an industry-wide goal of becoming net zero by 2050. Now, it is important to understand what net zero actually means. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a plane in the future that has zero emissions, but it means reducing, offsetting, and balancing emissions across operations, whether in manufacturing directly by Airbus or along the supply chain in end of life and more downstream.
Yeah, and a super cool side note here, definers. We did learn at the conference that technology for zero emission planes actually do exist. Although the technology is hard to scale for commercial planes, the journey is there and there is progress that we can hope for and look forward to. And just like that theme of innovation and technologies that aren't normalized to us was kind of mentioned over and over again. The first commercial flight took place about 100 years ago with only one passenger on it. And we've innovated so that there are now 1,500 to 2,000 commercial airplanes that take off or land every minute, which is insane.
Insane.
It's insane, and it honestly kind of makes me a little queasy to think about the carbon footprint.
Yeah, every minute is kind of crazy.
I know.
It's incredible.
What are we doing that we need to go that many places? But nevertheless,
Taylor Swift has got to be everywhere.
But nevertheless, it's amazing from an innovation perspective. Things that we never thought were possible are as normal as, bread and butter now, which is kind of insane. So
yeah, it was super cool to learn about that. And I was surprised to see that the technology for a zero emitting plane already does exist. I mean, it's incredible how futuristic technology can be.
Yeah.
So this plane that they showed us at the Airbus Summit looked super futuristic, and they were using solar panels sort of encompassing the entire body of the airplane and these batteries inside of the body of the airplane to have a never-ending zero-emitting flight, which they called the ultimate flight. Now, back to net zero. Net zero, again, doesn't mean that there are zero emissions being released, but rather it means that the amount of greenhouse gas emissions are balanced through the removal of that same exact amount of greenhouse gas that was put into the atmosphere in the first place.
There are some interesting ways to remove and sequester these emissions, mainly carbon. And we'll hear about this later on in one of our episodes with Angie on her direct air carbon capture technology that she actually demoed for us, which was really cool. So now a pressing question that you may have. This seems like it could be science fiction here, right? How can one of the most carbon intensive industries become carbon neutral? Well, at the Airbus conference, we learned that there are several ways to approach decarbonization in the aviation space. The first being fuel efficiency, the second being innovating air traffic management, and the third being using alternative fuels with less emissions in the form of SAFs, aka Sustainable Aviation Fuels.
Yeah, and decarbonization in the industry is still a ways away. But what is important that we remember here is that there is progress, transparency, and collaboration amongst the major players in this industry. Sort of like the approach that Tony's Chocolonely took in trying to take the chocolate industry, as we discussed in our last episode, and make that more transparent in order to enact progress to reach sustainable goals. Now, Airbus at the conference mentioned that they are taking on the role of a catalyst. Like we mentioned, they are the supplier in the aviation hierarchy, which means that they can set certain standards for airlines and their purchasers. They are working on innovations and technologies to inspire others in this industry and ultimately for these others to follow suit in decarbonization efforts. What resonated with me at this conference is that the aviation industry is such an inspiring industry because it shows and proves that the impossible can be made possible. They painted us this picture that it only took 55 years for aviation to develop the first flight prototype made by the Wright brothers into the Boeing 707 planes, one of the most iconic and first of its kind commercial planes, which set the foundation for air travel as we know it. and as Taylor Swift knows it. So it's important again to remember that change takes time. And although decarbonization may seem like an impossible or science fiction goal for a carbon intensive industry, again, it can be possible.
Yeah, and Swifties were sorry, but like I love shading Taylor Swift. It's my passion. It's my passion.
We're going to lose the Swifties.
We're going to lose the Swiftie definer intersection, but it's okay. But it is very important to remember, definers, that we are here to make what seems like an impossible goal come to fruition and for it to be the new norms of the industry. And that brings me hope when even thinking about things like sustainable tech. I thought about that in terms of solar panels. At one point, they were so expensive, but because the technology started scaling and the demand started increasing, I feel like prices have started to regulate, which is amazing. So hopefully we see something like this take suit with the aviation industry as well and the SAFs that we're speaking of. So let's just go ahead and get into decarbonization and how Airbus is approaching this. I mentioned earlier the 3 ways to achieve reducing emissions in the industry. So let's start with number 1, fuel efficiency. Fuel efficiency is extremely important because it aims at reducing, of course, total fuel consumption, which in turn reduces the amount of emissions and can, further the path to decarbonization. And it also has a huge benefit from a cost savings perspective because let's be real, companies at the end of the day are not as concerned with reducing emissions as they are with reducing costs. And the aviation industry has progressed through several models of engines throughout its history, and each of these models subsequently have been more fuel efficient. Early aircrafts used piston engines that provided it with necessary thrust to get off the ground. The turbojet engines introduced in the 1950s revolutionized air travel and made it global. And today the engines used are turbofan engines, which improve fuel efficiency and noise reduction.
Yeah, and again, Airbus is not stopping with their progress, and they're not stopping with the turbofan engines either. To take things to the next level, Airbus is looking into a couple contenders in terms of efficiency engines. First, the open fan engine utilizes fan blades that generate thrust and are larger and not contained, such as in current generation engines. This open fan model allows air to move efficiently through the engine and reduces fuel consumption.
The next contender is hybridization of engines. So this combines different energy sources rather than solely relying on one type of fuel. And this can come in different forms. So currently Airbus is engaging in this hybridization through planes that can fly with up to 50% of SAF. That's again, sustainable aviation fuels. So, half regular, half sustainable. And we will get more into SAF later in our interview portion. But for a quick recap, today, SAF is made from a blend of conventional fuel and feedstock fuel. So this is actually surprisingly used cooking oils, agriculture and municipal waste, which to me is insane because all I can think about is that character from 21 Jump Street who used old grease for his car.
Smells like egg rolls.
Yeah, it does. Runs on leftover fry oil from Hunan Palace.
Such an iconic scene, but yeah, it's incredible that all these wastes are being used as resources, truly circular, and I love to see it. But Airbus's next generation aircraft will be able to fly with 100% sustainable aviation fuel, which has the potential to have CO2 emissions by 2050. Another cool fuel efficient innovation Airbus is working with is their hybrid electric propulsion model. This supplements the use of jet fuel or sustainable aviation fuel with the utilization of fuel cells and batteries, and it has the potential to reduce emissions of an aircraft by up to 5%, which seems small, but in terms of CO2 tons, it's actually very large.
Yeah, and this is a cool innovation. It's very similar to hybrid cars, where electric hybridization can reduce fuel consumption by using otherwise wasted energy to power those non-propulsive functions. Another way to make an aircraft more fuel efficient is by making it lighter. The way this is done is by using different materials. Materials like carbon fiber and titanium have revolutionized this by making a plane lighter and thus requiring less fuel input. We actually got to feel the difference between these materials in a demo, and it was pretty significant.
Incredibly significant. Holding the old type of materials that they used to use, which I think was aluminum and something else. Do you remember, Nethra?
I think it was steel. And of course, steel and those things are needed for certain parts of the plane, but for other parts of the plane, you can kind of switch over to those composite materials and the aluminum that we did get to feel.
Mm-hmm. And it was such a stark difference. And of course, Airbus doesn't stop there. We learned at the conference that Airbus is currently researching how to use biomass composites and thermoplastics for even more weight reduction. They're also being very selective about the materials they're choosing from in terms of recyclability to have less waste and less assembly times. And we'll hear more about this in our interview with Sue Partridge, where these lighter materials are being used in the wings of the aircraft to revolutionize how their airplanes are flying.
Right. And now on to the next. Sea Definers, we're trying to get straight to the point and keep it short and sweet for you. So we appreciate you keeping up. But air traffic management, that was the second approach. And that was a very highlighted approach during the summit. On a side note, air traffic actually blows my mind. Like, to think there's a whole network of people and transportation above our heads, like, right now is wild.
I feel like they need their own reality show, you know? Like, I would love to see all that commotion.
All that drama.
Yes, so much drama.
But Airbus is an active member of the Single European Sky ATM Research, also known as CESAR. It's a joint undertaking, and this works to enhance air traffic management procedures to reduce emissions. So they are participating in multiple projects like this, investigating, wake energy retrieval, which we'll talk about more.
Yeah, and for those that do not speak aviation like we do, what this means is that air traffic management is coordinating flights so that one aircraft follows the other. And when a flight moves through the air, it creates a drift behind it. And if we were to coordinate aircrafts to move strategically, the other aircrafts can actually benefit from this drift. So the first one takes off, the second aircraft benefits from that first aircraft's free lift, and it requires less engine thrust and momentum and fuel. So this reduces fuel consumption and creates up to another 5% reduction in CO2 emissions. Birds do this all the time. I mean, definers, have you ever seen geese fly in a V shape? This is intentional, as is everything in nature by design, and it's sort of what the aircrafts are trying to mimic through this air traffic management control. And the wake energy retrieval operations draw inspiration from this V-shaped flight pattern of migrating geese who surf and take advantage of that air upwash or updraft of the leading bird in the front. And we'll hear more about this from our expert, Jonathan Beck of the Fellow Fly program, later in the episode. So stay tuned, Definers.
Like, could you imagine seeing that in the sky? Like, you see like a squadron of planes like in a V formation. You're like, damn, this is like Top Gun or something. And then it's just like a bunch of Spirit airline aircrafts. Like,
oh my God, Spirit Top Gun is crazy.
Spirit Top Gun, Diviners. We're pitching that at the next summit. But it is incredible to see how solutions to mitigate impact to nature actually mimic nature. It's ironic and it's silly, really. Like, the solutions are right under our nose.
They really are.
But now we've learned a bit about these two approaches to decarbonization. Let's talk about the final one, using alternative fuels. We've talked a bit about SAFs, but there is a lot more information to it. At the conference, there was a large focus on hydrogen fuel. And this seems like it'll be the future for the aviation industry in some regards.
And the future is nearer than we think, really. At the conference, something I found interesting was that they mentioned that SAFs are not a disruptor to the functions of the industry. What they meant by disruption is that a disruption forces innovation, such as in this space, it would be forcing innovation to reduce greenhouse gas. So what does the future hold for alternative fuels? Nethra mentioned hydrogen, but there's also electrification. There are a couple of challenges to both, but let's start with hydrogen. Hydrogen has low ambient density, aka lower overall density, which requires it to be stored at negative 253 degrees Celsius. I mean, that's really cold, and the technology required to keep it that cold is extensive. It requires advanced storage technologies to make it practical for the aircraft to use, and the main challenge is to adapt and scale this hydrogen to commercial aircraft.
But let's not get too tied up in the challenges. I mean, the benefits of hydrogen include a higher energy to mass ratio, making it appealing to the aviation industry. It also has the potential to abate some of those emissions that are tied to its storage. What Airbus is doing is interesting because it's combining electrification and hydrogen into one plane. And this is done through hydrogen fuel cell technology that they had demoed. These cells are scalable. We actually saw this in virtual reality, which was really interesting. But these cells are scalable, meaning that they can be combined into fuel cell stacks to increase their power output. So Airbus has founded AeroStack, a joint venture with Elring Klinger, to research, develop, and assemble the fuel cell stacks for the future Zero-E aircraft.
The Zero-E aircraft is an aircraft with zero emissions. For it to be a success, more investment in hydrogen storage and infrastructure is needed. This Zero-E aircraft was sort of a test model in order to adapt this technology and scale it to commercial aircrafts in the future. And they showed us some videos of this, and it was incredible to see. I mean, you can find it on their website as well, on Airbus's website. But significant economic, technological, and regulatory hurdles remain, but Airbus is collaborating with a variety of industry players, including energy providers and airports, in order to advance this innovation.
Exactly. I mean, like we said earlier, Airbus, they're a big name. They are the supplier. They are where the airlines go to buy their craft. So I kind of feel like this puts a good amount of power in their hands to say, like, hey, if you want to work with us, like, you have to follow suit with sustainable innovation, which is a really unique positioning. And this next generation of single-aisle aircraft will bring significant improvements in costs and operations and emissions reduction. So like I said, like that positioning of Airbus and their ability to sort of scale and spread these innovations is a win-win, if you ask me.
And we love a win-win in sustainability. I mean, what else could you want, right? And they're more common than you think, definers, since sustainability is such an interconnected issue across varieties of industries, sectors, and factors. Fixing one issue can oftentimes fix another. Now, to wrap up our explainer, Airbus is committed to sustainability. They see climate risk as a humanitarian and financial risk and are developing holistic solutions to adapt and mitigate these challenges. We'll hear more about how they're doing this in our upcoming interview.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear from the interviewees. And just one more thing about that win-win scenario. This was something that came up a lot in the summit, which is businesses need to make the business case for sustainability. Like I said, pitching reduced emissions, unfortunately, isn't enough, maybe to our generation, because we just don't want to die and we're scared and we're stressed.
Such a grim scenario.
Such a grim scenario. But like, my mom always says this, and I used to think it was like, I don't know, I used to just not internalize it, but money speaks.
This is true.
And like the business case sometimes matters more than, you know, the obvious reasons. So the win-win here is like cost reductions. When airplanes can and aircraft and aviation companies can reduce those emissions, it really does have a huge cost benefit. I mean, of course, there's upfront investment with investing in these technologies, but I think as organizations, people, and just, sustainable professionals, we need to think long term.
Shout out mom for that.
Shout out my mother. There is like so much I could say about this, but we're going to be hearing from some lightning interviews that we conducted during the conference from Sue, Jonathan, Julie, Angie. So yeah, we're excited. First up is Angie. She will be explaining how Airbus is working to offset their emissions through direct air capture programs.
Hi, Definers. I'm here with Antia from Airbus Central Innovation. She is leading the direct air capture program at Airbus, a global company. One of the main challenges with carbon offsets is how you scale this technology in order to actually make change. Could you tell us a bit about how your program is doing this?
Okay, hi, welcome everyone. This is really nice talking to you. We're here live from Toulouse. Okay, Airbus is building direct air capture technologies, and the question that I get is, yes, why are you doing that? You're normally building planes, right? Well, there's a very simple reason, two simple reasons. One is we can do that. We know how to do direct air capture because we built this technology since over 20 years for our space applications. Imagine you're out there in space, you're breathing out CO2, you can't open a window in space, so someone needs to take out that CO2 from your air. This is what we do since long time. My team, or our team here now, is scaling this technology up into relevant and significant sizes in order to lower the CO2 concentration from our atmosphere, in order to make us safe briefly here on the ground as well. So that's the first reason, because we know how to build the technology. The second reason is that Airbus has a very strict route to net zero by 2050. And for those of you that know what net zero means is, You have to reduce emissions as much as you can. But at the end, you always have residual emissions that are staying. You can't remove everything. And in order to compensate those residual emissions, you need to take exactly that amount out of the atmosphere as a negative emission in order to be net zero. And this is what direct air capture can do. We remove CO2 and we will enable the sequestration of that CO2 to bring it back down into the ground where it was forever.
Thank you. And it's incredible to see how far this technology has come from cycling or recycling the air that astronauts breathe all the way to scaling up this technology on a global scale. In terms of that, what are the main challenges with scaling this technology, and what are the strategies or innovations that you have taken to combat these challenges?
Okay, good question. The challenges are quite, well, there's always a lot of challenge in technology.
Right.
It looks easy, but then it's still difficult. So I would say first big challenge in direct air capture is price and electricity consumption. So these machines, they are consuming a lot of energy. So our biggest focus is on how to reduce the energy consumption of those systems. We have a lot of innovations brought in that differentiate our modules from current systems in order to reuse the heat that we apply and so on. So there's a pathway to come down with the prices. The other challenge is the supply chain. So we're talking about a new technology. Having a supply chain for direct air capture is not available. So we need to build a supply chain from scratch. And then the other challenge also is we need to find acceptance from our buyers, right? Buying a ton of carbon dioxide is something that no one did so far. So we're seeing now an emerging market, but we need much more demand and understanding and education also from corporates to move into carbon removal from DAC.
A follow-up question, as demand continues to grow, would you expect that the price of this technology could lower and make it more obtainable for other industries?
The price for the technology needs to lower. So there's no way around. But I would also ask for a lot of acceptance for high prices at the beginning because we are in nascent steps. New technology is expected at the moment and at the beginning, and we need a lot of capital at the moment in order to reach a point of now we are ready to lower the prices, but we need the allowance to find that path on ourselves. But what is also true is that with scale, prices will go down. We see a lot of innovations coming in. We will have a long-term target on prices that will be equal to the compliant market prices. So we see compliant markets coming up in the future, and these compliant market will set a price for CO2. So I personally believe that the price for a ton of CO2 removed needs to be equalized or balanced with those carbon compliant market CO2 prices.
And I was wondering, when we talk about the physical specs of this direct air capture, is this something that attaches to the plane? Is this a standalone technology? Like, for the definers listening, like how can they imagine this?
I think this is one of the biggest challenges in aviation. We can't put it on a plane. This is different. If you have an aluminium company and you have a spotometer, you put a carbon capture technology into your spotometer and you capture your carbon directly at the source. In aviation, this is not possible. We have an engine, and this engine burns fuel, but we can't capture the emission from that engine. That's why we need to capture decentralized somewhere else. And if you ask for the locations, so where will we see direct air capture in the future? Mainly in more remote locations where we have enough green power, where we're not in the competition with grid, and we are not harming the environment to do that.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, definers, I hope you learned a bit about direct air capture at Airbus and how they're offsetting some of their emissions. Now, up next, we have Sue Partridge, who is the head of Wing Tomorrow program. She is an engineer focused on advancing wing technologies in order to support these decarbonization efforts. Let's get into it.
Hey everybody, we're here with Sue Partridge, head of the Wing of Tomorrow for Airbus. She is going to be telling us a bit about the nature-based solutions and the biomimicry in the design of the aircrafts at Airbus. So Sue, we'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us about what you're doing here.
Hello, it's great to be here. So I'm Sue Partridge and I lead a program in Airbus called the Wing of Tomorrow. We're trying to get the business ready for the next generation of aircraft that will come in the future, and wings will play a really important part on that aircraft. If you look at the basic physics before we come on to nature, what that tells us is that the wing is a way of really improving the aerodynamic efficiency of the aircraft and reducing the amount of fuel that it burns. And the best fuel, of course, is the fuel that you don't burn. Right. So by making our wings very long and very slender, we reduce the amount of fuel that we burn. And you only have to look to nature to see that that's true. If you think about seabirds, like an albatross, that flies really long distances just floating on the air currents, they waste very little energy because their wings are super, super efficient. And that's where we're trying to emulate that with our long, slender wings here at Airbus.
I love that.
Are there any challenges in terms of resource acquisition with the longer and slender wings? And what are the main key players in the supply chain?
So one of the big challenges with making the wings of Airbus aircraft long and slender is around the world today there are hundreds of thousands of airport gates, and they are a fixed size. And when the aircraft lands at an airport, it still needs to be able to taxi in to the terminal and fit into those airport gates. So in order to address that challenge, the wings we're developing will need to fold. And so what will happen is the aircraft will land, the wing will unlock, and a section of it will fold up. It will taxi to the terminal, the passengers will get on and the new passengers will embark. And then as it taxis out again, the wings will unfold, lock in place, that's very important of course,
yes,
and the aircraft will take off. So that's a really big challenge because it's a very important system. It has to work every time. It has to be very reliable. So we're working closely with partners in our systems supply chain to help us develop that. And that's one of the key challenges that we're facing.
Thank you. With decarbonization in mind, how much would these innovative wings and the folding of them decarbonize this sector, and what do the emissions look like?
So already today, the aircraft that we deliver into service, like the A321XLR, for example, is 25% more efficient than the previous generation. And, you know, if you go all the way back to the 1960s, as you've already heard from Guillaume Faury, you know, we're looking at being 80 or 90% more efficient. On our next generation of single aisle, when we make the decision to launch it, we'll be looking for another 25% improvement. And that improvement will come from the engines and the wings together. So the wing will play a really important part in achieving that next step change in improvement.
So we can see that the aircrafts of the future are really looking to patterns in nature, such as those trends you can even see just like with the mimicry of birds and albatrosses. So something that we heard on the main stage was that if aviation crafts were to actually fly in a bird-like formation, in that V formation,
yes,
it would actually save emissions. How does that work?
So, have you ever seen geese flying in the sky?
It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah. So they form a V shape, don't they?
Yes.
And they do that for a reason. It's exactly the same if you think about cyclists cycling in a peloton of cyclists. The guy at the front, or in this case the bird at the front, takes the load, has all of that drag from being in the airflow, and the other birds tuck in behind and they get shelter from the airflow, and therefore they have much less drag. And it's exactly the same for geese as it could potentially be for aircraft. So that's what's called formation flying, and it really is a real option that we are investigating.
That's incredibly innovative, and I can't wait to see these innovations in the future take place. Going back to the main challenge with taxiing and these fixed measurements in the airport, how would geese formation flying pose a challenge to taxiing and landing at an airport?
I don't think that the two are connected that much, really, because how I imagine formation flying working is the aircraft will all take off and land at the airports much as you see it today, but the air traffic controllers would then organise them into groups when they're actually, you know, away from the airport, away from that congested area around the airport, and
yes,
they're about to take off on their longer segments of their flight. So I think the two are complementary to each other, because if you also have these long, slender wings and you're flying in formation, imagine how efficient you could be.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
Well, thank you so much, Sue. We really appreciate you being on Sustainability Defined.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Great to meet you both.
Incredibly interesting takeaways here. I mean, biomimicry and engineering involves drawing inspiration from nature's design and processes to create sustainable solutions, like we saw with that GEESE formation. And it's amazing how biomimicry can be incorporated into an industry that is not inherently sustainable. So the key takeaway here is that there is always a solution. And creativity, again, with collaboration and buy-in, is necessary to mitigate these challenges.
Exactly. And up next, we'll be hearing more about how this biomimicry works with Jonathan Beck, who is the Fellow Fly project leader at Airbus. This program focuses on wake energy retrieval and other aspects of biomimicry, such as that geese flight formation that we mentioned earlier, and we'll continue to hear more about that.
Jonathan, could you tell us a little bit more about this program and what got you interested in this field?
So this program started quite a long time ago already in Airbus. First studies were about 2015 in Airbus. Initially, it was all very theoretical, looking at what nature can bring, how birds do it, and what theoretically we could gain in terms of fuel burn for a pair of aircraft. The first experiment was made in Airbus in 2016 using pairs of flight test aircraft. And soon after, I joined the program in 2018 to develop what we called at that time automated formation flying, which goal was to prove that it was feasible to automatically and safely surf a vortex for a long period of time. Obviously, that's not something that you want to ask the pilot to do. It's cruise phase, 10 hours of flying. Pilot won't be able to withstand that activity for that long. So it was part of Airbus subsidiary named Airbus Up Next. I'm sure you heard about that for a 3-year program aiming at showing in real life that it was feasible to automatically surf the vortex for a long period of time and demonstrate the fuel saving. So I've been working on the program since then, and it's been evolving quite a lot, and I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about the GEESE program?
So GEESE program has been set up mid-2023. It was a follow-up of the initiative that we took before in Airbus Up Next. What we shown in Airbus Up Next that it was technically feasible to surf a vortex for a long period of time. What missed after that was, okay, it works technically, but can we make it in a real operation, in a real environment with ATM on the ground, with actual airlines flying that? So the goal of the GEESE program is precisely to tackle the operational point of the project, meaning that we partner with 18 different operational bodies of aviation, mostly European aviation, but not only. We have airlines, we have air traffic controllers, we have network manager, we have system supplier for the ground solutions. We have everyone that would be involved in that kind of operation, and the goal is to make sure that we commonly define a concept of operation that works for everyone, not only from an aircraft manufacturer standpoint, but for everyone.
Okay, so what I understand is this whole program is to basically operationalize and see if you could scale this.
Exactly.
So it's to test it.
Exactly. We intend to have flight trials as part of the GEESE program, using the actual traffic from the airline partners. So as an airline partner, we do have Delta Airlines, very big airline. We have Air France as well, big as well. And then we have smaller airlines that have their own specificities, like Virgin Atlantic and French Bee, small French airlines.
Okay, great. And based on the findings, like, have you seen this to be something that can be feasible and implementable on a mass scale?
This is, so it's still a work in progress. We have the trial scheduled later this year, by Q4 this year, in which we intend to be able to detect and organize the rendezvous of pairs of aircraft using actual traffic. So far in the simulation, everything seems to work correctly. Now, later this year, we will see if in real life that works as expected as well.
It's inspiring to see the work out there, especially in an industry that is so hard to decarbonize. What would you say are the biggest challenges in automated formation flying in terms of decarbonization?
I would say it's a matter of organization. We have so many actors involved, specifically on the ATC side of things. For an aircraft manufacturer, we are basically one or two to convince in order to agree on something. When we speak about air traffic management, every single state in the world have its own set of rule, regulation, and procedures. And we need to make sure that everyone that will be involved in that kind of operation will agree on a common set of rules and procedure. And the sheer amount of diversity in the ATC is going to be a real challenge, both in terms of agreeing in procedures and in terms of developing the appropriate tools, which is usually specific to each and every country in the world.
Is there a country that is leading in this automated formation flying project?
The European Union is clearly at the top front of the development through the GEESE project. We have very good support of the CESAR program. And in terms of ATC, the countries that are heavily involved are the UK, Ireland, France, and then we have other on the east side of Europe, Lithuania and Bulgaria, that is as well investing on the project.
Thank you. My next question is, how do you see the trajectory of automated formation flying fitting into the industry-wide goal of net zero by 2050?
So it will clearly not do all of it. Clearly, we are aiming at reducing the total amount by 1 or 2% of the long-range fleet. That looks small, 1 or 2% of the long-range fleet, but considering that we are tackling the existing fleet and not replacement of the fleet, it can have a huge impact, because having 2% reduction of the in-service fleet is not something that you can easily achieve.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And before we end our interview, I like to ask all of our guests, what's something that inspires you? What is something hopeful that you see in this space?
So thing that makes me hopeful, that when we started this program, even in Airbus in 2015, many people were saying, but that's crazy, you are never going to fly so close together, it's the safety risk, it's not going to be controllable, it's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And 10 years after, we proved that it was feasible, it was safe, it was comfortable, and we are bringing many actors in the world on the topic, despite all the contradictory opinions that we had at that time. Now we have major partners, I named Delta, Air France, Virgin, French Bee, that are investing heavily in the project because now they believe in it. So this makes me hopeful that yes, in a few years' time, we will manage to put that in operation.
That's great. And for the definers listening at home, on the main stage yesterday, we heard from Mr. Picard, who is an aviation icon, essentially. And he was saying that it was just 60 years between the developments of major commercial aircrafts that you know today and the first aircraft by the Wright brothers. So a lot can happen over a short period of time, and innovations and disruptions in the space are very common. So stay hopeful, stay curious, stay innovative. I think these are all the things that we learned here at the Airbus Summit, and, question what's possible. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here today.
You're very welcome.
And now for our final interview, Julie Kitcher, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Airbus.
Day 2 at the Airbus Summit with Julie Kitcher, Chief Sustainability Officer at Airbus. We're here in Toulouse, France. And Julie, you've been on the main stage quite a bit in the last 2 days. We've been hearing a lot from you. The listeners are eager to hear a little bit more about the initiatives and actions that you guys are taking in the aviation space. So you have a deep background in finance and aerospace, and you've really been talking a lot about the advances that Airbus is making in sustainability in terms of aviation fuels and hydrogen and all of that good stuff. So could you tell us a little bit, just to break it down for the listeners, what is the difference between traditional fuels and sustainable aviation fuels?
Sure. So it's great to be with you. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. And indeed, it's been an exciting couple of days. So hopefully it's been an opportunity to learn about what we're doing here in Airbus. So when it comes to fuel, today, let's just put the facts on the table. Aviation represents 2 to 3% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's still very much dependent on fossil fuel in the main. That said, our technology, our aircraft can fly today with up to 50% sustainable aviation fuel. So it's not a pipe dream. It's not a thing of tomorrow. It's actually possible today. And I think that's really important to recognize. So what do we mean by sustainable aviation fuel? Well, today it's a biofuel that can be created by waste, so food waste, used cooking oil, for example, or crop waste. It's certified as sustainable, which means that it doesn't compete with food or land use for food, and actually has the same properties as jet fuel. So you mix it with jet fuel, with kerosene, to have sustainable aviation fuel. And on a life cycle basis, that can save up to 80% CO2 emissions on the life cycle. So it's very, very important and promising energy usage for aviation.
Wow, that's so interesting, because I think a lot of our listeners, including myself, would be like, wow, a plane like powered by old cooking food oil waste? Like, that doesn't seem right, but it's a viable technology. Like,
absolutely, it's flying today. And so when you look at what we've done in our activities, so 18% of our fuel was sustainable aviation fuel last year. So that's for our flight tests, and it's for our beluga operations, so our oversized transportation that flies the components between the sites, which shows it's a reality. Yeah. It's not something that's coming sometime in the future.
It's happening right now.
It's right now. It's right here.
That's great. And Julie, I mean, I'm just going to, I guess, straight shoot it. Like, I mean, the airline industry, it deals with a lot of claims of greenwashing, which then in turn, I mean, we've seen this rise of, really aware consumers, especially Gen Z, really pointing the finger at corporations being like, change needs to happen. Here's what's going on in your supply chain, in your industry, and here's what we don't like about it. And a lot of companies have responded with green hushing, which is like, for the listeners, a phenomenon of companies kind of not disclosing what they're doing in fear of backlash, even though they might be doing good work. How does Airbus manage claims of greenwashing and all of this?
So here's the thing, and you mentioned my background in finance. For us, it starts with transparency and really explaining and describing the reference, so where we are today. And we first disclosed our Scope 3 emissions. In fact, we were the first aircraft manufacturer to disclose Scope 3 emissions for the whole sector with that view in mind. So I very much come from the perspective of you can only improve what you can measure. And so that starts with transparency. And then once you have the transparency and a baseline, you can set yourself meaningful goals and targets, and then communicate on the progress that you're making towards those targets. And that's really key. And I think one of the striking things for aviation is that we have a goal for the sector, actually, for the overall sector that brings together, aircraft manufacturers, the engine manufacturers, the airlines, all of the partners. So a sector goal to be net zero by 2050. And on top, the states have also made ambitious plans and goals to meet that net zero 2050 target. And that gives us optimism because we have the levers, actually. So when we talk about greenwashing, we have clearly defined levers to meet that decarbonisation trajectory, and we can communicate on the actions that we're implementing to get there.
Great. And where can our listeners find more information on this to tap into what you guys are doing on this granular level?
Yeah, so you can look at our website. So go to the Airbus website for a start, where we've really tried to describe in a clear way what we're doing and the sector goals, as well as in our upcoming sustainability report, which I'm very excited to say will be coming before the AGM in April. And so your listeners can look and provide questions and feedback with pleasure. We're always looking for ways to improve what we do. And I think it's really important to describe the different levers that we have available. So it's about technology and innovation, first and foremost. With every new generation of aircraft we deliver, we reduce fuel consumptions by 20 to 25% on average, which is clearly the first lever for decarbonisation, reducing fuel emissions and actually reducing cost for our airlines, and therefore improving their competitivity. So their business models are really built on those latest generation technologies. Next, and at the same time, we're working on the technology bricks of the future, so that then when the time's right, we'll be reducing the fuel consumption by another 25%, hence reducing emissions and cost for our airline partners. And all the work we're doing to advocate and catalyse for sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen in the industry, as well as the work on policy. So we need a policy framework at a global level for this global industry.
Great. And it seems like you're taking a true intersectional approach when talking about legislation and engaging stakeholders. And, you mentioned that on the main stage yesterday, that it is not only an Airbus goal to reach net zero by 2050, but an industry level goal.
Absolutely.
And you said that, you touched on that in your earlier response, but, as the supplier here, as the person who is working with airline partners, are there standards that you can set to say, like, if you want to have an Airbus craft, you have to meet X, Y, and Z in your own sustainability goals to be affiliated with us? Like, is there anything like that?
So we have a complete value chain approach to our sustainability roadmap. When we're analysing the CO2 emissions of an aircraft, we look at a life cycle approach. So we're looking at the materials that we source. We're looking at the design and development process. We're looking at the manufacturing process and the end-of-life process. So we're working extensively with our suppliers in the value chain, and we have a supplier sustainability council with our tier 1 suppliers who follow the same sustainability criteria that we do. So CDP rating, work on ethics and compliance, integrity, safety, human rights. So all the elements of sustainability through the supply chain, as well as CO2 emission reduction. We're looking at circularity. And then when it comes to our own industrial footprint, of course, we've set ourselves some pretty stringent targets to 2030. So reducing our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, we have a goal of reducing them by 63% by 2030 off a 2015 baseline. We're looking at reducing our water consumption. We've set a goal on waste reduction, on total energy usage. And so we're really embedding our sustainability commitments throughout the organization, and obviously focused on human rights and inclusion, focused on doing our business with integrity, obviously building our products on a foundation of safety and quality. That's first and foremost. So it shows that we have really a holistic approach to sustainability. And then we have a joint venture with joint venture partners on end of life, so that we can look at how to recycle the material in an aircraft at the end of life. And actually, I don't know if you know, but you can recycle more than 90% in weight of an aircraft at the end of its life.
That's amazing. And where does that recycled material go? Is that for other aircrafts or for something else?
On the engine side, it can go for other aircraft, and then the materials can go elsewhere. But it very much depends on the end use. We're also doing some very fun upcycling. I don't have them on to show you today, but we have some sneakers that we've created. We partnered, so I chair the Airbus Foundation, and we partnered with an association called Sans les Plumes, and we used some cabin interiors to create sneakers, handbags and belts from A350 cabins that have been upcycled into products, which also shows that there's a real appetite, because they sold like hotcakes.
That's so cool. I propose flight hostesses to have dresses made of old blankets and seats. That would be so cool.
Yeah.
That would be so designer. I guess one last question for you here is, our generation, we're feeling a lot of heaviness, like right now, especially with sustainability, the future of climate, changes in administration, etc. So what are you hopeful about in sustainability?
So I'm hopeful in that ultimately we're working for the long term. And I think what this decade has shown is that every year brings a new type of crisis, and modern life is about navigating through these crises. And when I think about young generations, I'm very enthusiastic, because they can look through the immediate crises to something much further afield. And in this industry, we're providing connectivity, we're providing a bigger understanding between cultures, we're driving economic growth and prosperity for the future based on innovation and technology for product life cycles that really last decades. And so it's about looking through the immediate complexity and looking longer term to give inspiration and hope for future generations to be able to benefit from that connectivity and economic prosperity and growth that comes from this sector for decades and decades to come.
Julie, it is inspiring to see that an industry that is not inherently sustainable is making progress in this space. In your words, what is the business case for sustainability here at Airbus?
So first and foremost, we've embedded sustainability in our company purpose. So we're pioneering sustainable aerospace for a safe and united world. And actually, that goes throughout our portfolio of products. So it's aviation, it's space, it's defense, it's helicopters. So with our products and services, we're providing connectivity, we're providing economic growth and prosperity, we're providing protection for citizens and nations and stability. So we really believe in Airbus that our portfolio of products and services meets global sustainability objectives and needs. Then when it comes to those individual businesses, we break down the contribution to our sustainability goals so that we can really embed sustainability in the business and hold ourselves accountable.
So there are three approaches to sustainable business. There's the compliance focus, the ethical focus, and the business focus. Where do you see Airbus fitting into these three categories?
So I would say all of the above. We
Okay.
have really a holistic approach to sustainability. And when we look at sustainability from a business perspective, it's important to understand the impact of the external world and society on our business. And, as responsible corporate citizens, to understand the impact that we have as a business on society and the ecosystem at large. So, of course, it's about financial and business risk. And it's about the impact that we can have on ecosystems, on biodiversity throughout the value chain of our activities. So it's a double assessment, I would say, an outside-in view and an inside-out view, so that ultimately we can reduce our negative footprint but increase our positive impact.
Thank you. And a holistic approach is one of the most important ways to approach sustainability in order to actually implement change. And in terms of impact, what does sustainability or the implementation of this strategy at Airbus look like for airline customers? How will they manage changes to Airbus, and will there be an impact to how customers fly across the skies?
So it's all about technology and innovation. And that's where our business is to provide, in the aviation business, is to provide our airline customers with the most fuel efficient, technologically advanced aircraft. So the aircraft coming off the production line today are actually today's most fuel efficient, technologically advanced aircraft. And that's our core business, to ensure that our airlines can fly with lower cost, lower fuel consumption, therefore more competitive advantage, and of course lower emissions. Ultimately, when it comes to the investment cycle in our business, Airbus invests more than 3 billion euros per annum on R&D for new technologies. In addition to that, obviously, when we talk about sustainable aviation fuel, you asked it from a customer perspective, they won't feel the difference when they're flying in an aircraft, but they may well see the difference on the ticket price, because ultimately somebody needs to pay. And each of the actors in the aviation ecosystem will end up contributing some of that green premium, if you like, to the higher cost of SAF. But the more fuel efficient the aircraft, the less fuel that the airline needs to purchase, giving them a bit more opportunity to cover some of that green premium. But we also need to see efforts from policymakers on mandates and incentives to be able to close the gap.
Great. And you touched on the fact that there's this green premium and there's extra costs associated with SAFs, aka Sustainable Aviation Fuels. Are we going to see a decrease in this price in the future?
Listen, it's all about business case and economies of scale. So ultimately, when we can drive sufficient supply because the fuel producers see the signal that there is sufficient demand, we should get economies of scale. Will it ever be the same price as jet fuel? Perhaps not. But will we be innovative in the solutions that we can find? I'm confident that with all of the actors in this sector, we can move together to find innovative ways to close that green premium.
Julie, you have a background in finance. Are you confident that investing in sustainable projects and technology, will that make Airbus a more resilient company in the future? How do you see that going?
Yeah, so I think, again, sustainability is inherent to our business model when you think about the aircraft that we sell to our customers. I think a step change that needs to come when we think about sustainable business is, rather than reflecting on sustainability as a cost, it should become an investment for the future. Climate risk is a business risk, it's a financial risk, it's backed by physics. We saw that 2024 was the warmest year on record, exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So the physics won't change, the urgency will only grow. And when it comes to reflecting on the cost or the sustainability premium, actually the cleanup costs, the consequences of these climate impacts are such that we need to change the reflection. To invest now for prevention is far more cost effective for businesses in the long run, rather than having to clean up the damage from these effects. So we need to change the angle of the lens on the investment equation.
Right. A proactive approach rather than reactive.
Absolutely.
Yes. You mentioned that the customers for Airbus are airlines. How are they dealing with the sustainability approaches that you are taking and the changes that are being implemented at the company?
So it's a great question. And obviously, from a customer perspective, and we heard it from Qantas this morning, the primary lever for sustainability is taking delivery of the latest generation aircraft. So that's priority number one from an airline perspective, to have, the most performing, fuel efficient aircraft possible. And on top, to be able to put sustainable aviation fuel inside. So we've created the technology to be able to do that. The issue from an airline perspective is the cost. It currently costs 3 to 5 times the price. So SAF today costs 3 to 5 times the price of kerosene. And so we need to be able to enable the airlines to get access to SAF in volumes at affordable prices. And that's what we're working towards as an industry.
Thank you. Again, it is so inspiring to see so much change that is positive change in an industry where it is hard to approach and it can be scary. One of the biggest lessons we have learned from previous interviews was to not be scared when approaching sustainability. So we appreciate the boldness that Airbus has taken in their strategy, and thank you for having the time to sit down with us today.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Okay, definers, that wraps up the interview portion of our episode. Now let's get into some of the key takeaways and generalizations of what we've learned today. Approaching decarbonization in this industry can be very scary, but technologies and innovation are helping bridge together some of the gaps in reducing greenhouse gas emissions while still achieving profitability, which is central for most businesses, of course.
Of course.
In the case of Airbus, this means innovating planes with biomimicry, such as a GEESE flight formation, lighter materials, sustainable aviation fuels, and alternate technologies of the future like hydrogen and fuel cells. Airbus is working on their sustainability goals while making sure that the price doesn't entirely fall on the responsibility of the consumer, and still focusing on maximizing those profits and safety for customers, which they emphasize over and over again is their top concern.
And this key takeaway of innovation to offset and reduce emissions can be generalized across multiple industries and sectors of business and economy. For example, abating and offsetting emissions are a very hot topic across companies today. As companies face external pressure for transparency in their impact to the environment and society, they are revolutionizing their operations to include sustainability within their business model. So, definers, as you go to work, ask yourself these questions. How is my company investing in innovation to reduce environmental impact? Is sustainability within our core business strategy, or is it just in the corporate social report? Is sustainability framed as a cost, or is an opportunity for growth, efficiency, and resilience? Are employees empowered to take part in sustainability efforts? Okay, no. I need to restart that whole thing. So, definers, as you go to work, ask yourself some questions in order to innovate, inform, and inspire, as Airbus has so confidently said in their conference. How is my company investing in innovation to reduce environmental impact? Is sustainability within the core business strategy, or is it just in the corporate social report? Is sustainability framed as a cost, or rather an opportunity for growth, efficiency, and resilience? Are employees empowered to take part in sustainability efforts? Go to work, ask questions, stay hopeful, and maybe a little skeptical.
Yeah, something to think about, definers. Form your own opinions here too. Like, we are covering what we learned, and Cecilia and I had our own questions. So before we get into the thank yous and wrap up this episode, we just wanted to say that we're appreciative for opportunities like this to be able to attend and learn more about innovations in the industry. And we're appreciative of our Sustainability Defined team. Scott J. Taylor Keaton for your continued support, and Christy at Airbus who helped us set up these interviews and helped me find my lost suitcase. Yeah, that was great. So
shout out Christy.
Shout out Christy. Well, this was another episode of Sustainability Defined where we define sustainability one concept and bad joke at a time. I'm Nethra.
And I'm Cecilia. Thanks for listening, and see you for our next episode on May 2nd.